Hey guys, Ashley D. Will here, and today I'm talking about rescuing your children. The title of this post is called, Are You Rescuing Your Children? And this is mainly for parents with children, but it can also apply to your friends, your co-workers, your relatives, your neighbors, yourself. It can apply to anything because it has to do with boundaries and with reaping and sowing. Okay, so I'm going to share this with you, and it's just something to think about. So, parental instincts are wonderful and God-given, right? We know they are. Naturally, we love, we protect, we teach our children, we bond with them, and we provide for them as best we can. However, sometimes we can misuse our parental privilege by rescuing our children from consequences. And as a result, in that rescuing, which is well intended, mind you, we end up harming our children. Now, of course, I'm not referring to keeping your children out of harm's way. Definitely not. Of course not. But what I am referring to is habitually rescuing your children from painful consequences that could help them to grow up. Yes. Healthy parental instincts work toward what is best for the child today and in the long term, even if it means suffering a little bit in the short term. Okay, so for example, let's just say when we speak to our children, our words, as you know, can easily go in one ear and out the other. You know, wah, 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 like the teacher on Charlie Brown, okay? You know the deal, brushing and flossing your teeth to avoid the discomfort of having to get a cavity. Or wearing sunscreen to prevent the pain of sunburn and, skin cancer. Or maybe waiting for your pizza to cool off enough so you don't burn your tongue or the roof of your mouth. So as parents, we can repeat the same instructions to our children till we're blue in the face. However, you know as well as I do that once the child experiences for himself or herself the painful consequences of failing to follow the instruction, voila. What happens? We never have to say another word about it, do we? Of course not. Why not? Because the pain of the cavities, the pain of the sunburn, the pain of the burned tongue or roof of the mouth speaks louder than our words do. Pain speaks. Okay, so a little suffering for our children is a healthy and necessary part of growing up. Now, a personal example, 2 of our 4 children, I had a tendency to want to rescue them on occasion when they were in elementary school. And after feeling uneasy about the situation, I sifted through my soul and I figured out that the urge to rescue was partially originated with their inheritance of my forgetfulness gene. The problem was that I had harbored subconscious guilt about it. However, upon thinking about it, I finally came to realize that, of course, I had nothing at all to do with which genes were passed down to my children. That was God's territory and God's business. So I was off the hook. It then hit me that the world was not going to grant them slack once they got out, on their own, and neither should I if I wanted them to be prepared to live in the world. So before the oldest entered 6th grade, I told them all that they would be solely responsible for getting all their work to school on time. I would not be bringing anything to school anymore, no matter the sob story. I didn't want to hear it. So even though at the time for me it felt like cruelty, I knew it was best for them in the long run. Instead of taking the work to school, I learned to use empathy with them as they told me about the frustration or embarrassment they experienced that day. At the same time, I used the consequences as a teaching tool to help them learn a better way, offering to help them set up a solid system to help them from forgetting again, to prevent them from forgetting. So when we care more about the immediate grade than the long-term consequences of the grade in their lives, we need a little bit of a perspective check. Our harmful behaviors of rescuing them can masquerade as parental instincts hiding our need to be needed or our guilt about genes being passed down, while we are enabling the child to continue in the same pattern of failure. Okay, and in that they grow up in a state of learned helplessness. So we arrest their development in that. And so in this rescuing our children, we must examine our motives and why we're doing it. And the Lord can illuminate these for us when we bare our hearts to Him and ask for His help. So some questions to think about. Could we be living our lives vicariously through our children? Could we have unfinished business from our childhoods? Could we be lost in the superficiality of appearances and what others might think? Could we have forgotten about the deeper issues concerning character and life principles? One way to tell if we're on track is to examine our perspective. Short-term focus and keeping everybody happy is usually about ourselves, because we don't want to feel the anxiety if someone's upset. We don't want to feel the anxiety if our child fails a test, right? Whereas a long-term focus and a willingness to suffer a little bit is more about the betterment of our children. If we feel uncomfortable at the thought of our children growing up to be healthy and independent, then we may have deeper issues of wanting to be needed, wanting people to depend on us. If we try to get those needs met by feeding our children's need for us to rescue them, we are in reality smothering them with our own selfishness. Okay? That is not good, and it's not of God. An extreme example of using a child at her expense to meet the need to be needed would be giving a drug-addicted teen cash whenever she asked for it. We would be meeting our need to be needed by enabling her to need us or me, harming her by allowing her access to drugs and avoiding facing the necessary changes we need to make to get our needs met in a healthy way. See? The drug money example is upsetting because the scars of violation and injustice are immediately apparent to us, right? How can you give this child money when they're going to go spend it on drugs? And so, but other situations may seem benign compared to that, but they're usually not, because the scars in those other situations just take longer to manifest, but they're still there. They're just not as apparent in the moment. So in my parenting, I had to separate the protective and the provisional parental instincts from the enmeshment and the enablement tendencies. The protective and provisional instincts were fostering independence, while the enmeshment and enablement tendencies would have stifled my children from growing up to be healthy adults. So instead of teaching them to rely on me, which of course they had to until they were, at certain ages and certain stages, they relied on me because I was their mother, and I did everything for them. I fed them, I nursed them, and I did everything. But over time and step by step as they grew up, I taught them to develop systems to help them remember due dates, for example. Kind of like teaching a man to fish instead of giving him a fish. I remember when our children were in elementary school, they would help me do laundry. And by the time all our kids were in middle school, they were all doing their own laundry. And my goal was by the time they were in high school, they could be on autopilot. And they would be ready to, whether they're going to go to college or technical school or whatever they were going to do, that they could be independent. And I also transferred my goal was to transfer their dependence on me to dependence on the Lord. And I remember when they were in elementary school, they were all folding laundry, and I had a little 3 or 4-year-old, and I said, you know what, you can fold the washcloth. And she would just fold the washcloth. So she was participating, and she was kind of getting in that vibe of independence. So that was fun. So once I had set reasonable standards, then I followed through on them. And I could see the stability that provided for them. Instead of enabling forgetfulness, I was empowering independence. And I was letting them fail under my supervision so I could help them and, help them recover and encourage them. So even though the circumstances challenged me at the time, I'm so glad I let them suffer a little then, because today I can see it's paid off greatly in their favor and in my favor too, because I've delegated all of that stuff to them. And I don't have this extra load on my back that I really don't need. So even after 2 of our children have moved out, and I wrote this a while ago, but all but 1 is out now, I know that I don't have to constantly check up on them. I encourage them often, and I'm confident in them and their decisions and everything I've taught them, and I'm also confident in their learning curves and in remembering the poor decisions they've made in the past and the consequences that they will have to live with as a result. Why? Because Mommy's not going to rescue you. See, they have living inside their hearts the Holy Spirit and everything I've taught them, and they have my prayers, which surround them forever. Now, if our children choose to make poor decisions, and this is not my business anymore once they've moved out, I do not have to provide the consequences anymore like I did when they were little, because as long as I'm not interfering in their lives, life will deliver the consequences. God's scaffolding of the universe is reaping and sowing, and life will teach them very quickly in God's economy if I do not interfere. Okay, so they know that, for example, if they should choose to befriend undesirables, participate in illegal activities, and end up in jail, that will be too bad. But they will be checked in there for as long as the law requires. They're also aware of the 2x4 God has used on my husband from time to time. Needless to say, a couple of them do carry his genes. Those particular genes, the 2x4 gene. So anyway, the takeaway principle is as follows. Whatever a child sows, and again, this applies to any person, whatever a person sows, that should he reap. What you sow is what you should reap. What I sow, I should reap. What you sow, you should reap. And what someone else sows, they should reap. You should not be reaping what they sow. I should not be reaping what you sow, and so on. That's called enmeshment, and you're messing with God's design, and you're fighting God, and it's going to bite you on the butt, basically. So whatever a child sows, that should he reap. So he's going to reap what he sows. You're going to let him reap what he sows, but you're going to be there when he fails or messes up with your support and your encouragement and your willingness to help him set up a system where it won't happen again. You're not going to condemn him, shame him, guilt him, compare him with anybody. No, never, never, never. But you're just there to offer help. Okay, it's very simple. So sowing and reaping are God's natural teaching tools. And in families, sometimes it's hard for us to let these teaching tools take place. But when we interfere, it's not healthy, and we are enabling evil when we interfere with God's design of reaping and sowing. So I want to encourage you to release enmeshment and enablement and embrace growth in allowing God's teaching tools to apply freely in our own lives and in the lives of our children for the betterment of us all now and in the long run. So I know Galatians 6:7 says, "Be not deceived. God is not mocked, ever. He never will be mocked, and he never was mocked, and he's not mocked right now. Why? For whatever a man sows, that also shall he reap." This is God's design, reaping and sowing, reaping and sowing, reaping and sowing. Okay? Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Don't ever do anything to cause your child to have wrath toward you. Okay? A gentle answer turns away wrath. Gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit. When you operate in the fruit of the Spirit, your children will not have wrath toward you. They may go through stages where they have to get out some anger for some issues, but in the long term, they will not have wrath towards you. So rather, bring them up with the discipline and the instruction that comes from the Lord. And one of those principles would be in this post that I just shared you is instruction and discipline from the Lord, because that involves reaping and sowing. Reaping and sowing is so foundational, and sometimes in our, we mean well and we want to be a good parent, but when we're continually rescuing our children from the consequences of their actions, we are causing them to be disabled, and we are really arresting their development, and we are making them weak, and we are teaching them learned helplessness. And all of these things they're eventually going to have to learn later, and it's better for them to learn them now when they're under your supervision. In a third grade spelling test, it's easier to manage a big fumble than, when you're employed in a company and you have, maybe someone relying on you for income, or you have a child, or you have, mortgage to pay or whatever. The stakes are so much higher. So it's much better to let your child fail under your supervision, where you can teach them principles that can help them way down the road for the rest of their lives. Okay, so this is just a tip for parents to be discerning and with rescuing your children. Sometimes they need to be rescued. Obviously, if your 2-year-old runs into the middle of the street, for crying out loud, rescue them. And I'm not talking about keeping them out of harm's way, which I said before. I'm talking about reaping and sowing and things like that. So whatever gets under your skin that your child does, take it before the Lord, because it's really probably your issue. Okay? So I hope something I've said has been helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.